have a bit of a different style of moderation. I'd like to do this one standing up. They're the most important people, so I wouldn't join them. I would let them roam free and talk as much as they would want to be, and I'll just here helping you, point you in the right direction. So just for a minute, you know, for all of you, I just want you to take 1 minute, 1 to 2 minutes to let us understand what are you doing and what is your institution doing in this space. You know, let's just debunk that. Why are you here and why is your institution relevant to this conversation today? So ladies first, Honorable Addou, please.
But thank you so much. Well, for us as UN Women, we are the United Nations. For those of you who do not know, we're the United Nations entity for gender equality and empowerment of women. We've realized that, you know, in order to address the gender inequalities and to achieve the sustainable development goals, that we need to think differently and challenge ourselves in coming up with innovative ways of addressing age-old inequalities between women and men. So in order for us to look things, these same old issues in a different way, we are using or applying technologies and innovation as drivers of change in our work, and it's of course been a challenge, and that's something that we want to expand through partnerships with the private sector, with innovators like the Sahara Ventures, of course with our government partners, our other UN sister agencies, and the women's movement. But we want to make sure that the innovations and the technology that are being developed are taking into account the concerns of women and girls, their voices and their issues. So we've developed an innovation facility at our global level, looking specifically at those challenges on women's, for example, participation in political leadership, in local government, on issues related to addressing violence against women and girls, on women's financial inclusion and economic empowerment, and also looking at social norms and negative social practices that are contributing to gender inequalities and marginalizing women and girls. So we want to use technology and innovation as a solutions to these problems.
That's a very proactive and fantastic way to approach it. Technology as an enabler and not just disrupting businesses, but also disrupting negative practices that exist in the society affecting women. Engineer Ulanga, over to you. What's happening at UCAF? Why are you guys here?
Thank you very much. First, there is a correction which will come as in my conversation. For the past 24 years, I've been in the government sector looking at development. First, 24 years ago, it was telecommunications, and then it evolved to be ICTs. The most interesting thing is that seated here, I'm trying to remember my career when I started with the incumbent operator, then looking at the development of the sector from the point of view of an operator. Then I spent some years in the regulatory authority, and some of the conversation which was here earlier came to me as part of the government story was not told. What happened in 2004, 2005, when there was a new licensing framework in the country, which changed from the technology-specific licensing to technology and service-neutral licensing, was the futuristic look of the licensing framework. And the numbers speak for themselves. That is, from 2005 all the way to 2012, ICTs in Tanzania was the fastest growing sector, irrespective of all the economic conditions which were happening at that time. So it's something which it's possible, it's been done before, and I'm sure it's actually an opportunity for Tanzanians to actually start looking at how best can we leverage into the development of our fourth industrial revolution. But from 2009, I started as the CEO of Universal Communication Service Access Fund with a key objective, very specific, in trying to include more people in the digital space. How can we do that? And the first area was infrastructure. And this is what the fund has been known for, by putting up base stations in rural areas. And in doing so, up until December 2018, the coverage of the population in Tanzania was 94.5, which is among the highest on the similar size of countries in Africa. And this actually tells a story. Why would we invest so much in infrastructure? But there is another part of the fund. What the fund does is we also engage at the education, trying to teach, to train teachers to be able to harness the technologies, and we also empower schools, etc. There are so many other things in the bouquet of things. But as of June 2019, I've retired from the fund now. I am a thought leader, more or less looking at the new development. I consider myself a lifetime student after being a part-time and a full-time student much earlier. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Fantastic. And I think one of the most important perspectives we expect from you today, from this conversation, especially after the fact that you have already left government, is to hear the story of government. And you have said a very important thing. One of the things we never focus on when we're dealing with technologies and everything is that enabling environment. What is government doing to enable this space? And I would want to tap into your brains on that particular space in this conversation. So over to you, Eric, what are you doing?
All right. So I represent Chanzo Capital, and we primarily are an early stage investment fund. And we focus on investing in disruptive and enabling technologies. So we believe that strongly that there's a new generation of entrepreneurs that are building on the telecom infrastructure that has been created across Africa. And these entrepreneurs are really unleashing innovations in financial services, education, health, agriculture, you name it, which is what we term digitization. And so we focus on backing these entrepreneurs. So over the last 7 years, we have invested about $5 million in 16 companies. That portfolio is grown to about 48 million in assets now. And then secondly, we don't only provide capital, but we provide two other C's, what we call capacity and community. So our capacity building is around doing workshops, helping entrepreneurs with things that they need beyond capital. And then the third is community, which is connecting them into the various ecosystems around the continent. And our community event is called Angel Fair Africa. So every year we go into a new country on the continent. We select about 10 to 20 entrepreneurs. We invite about 40 to 50 investors. The entrepreneurs pitch and the investors invest in them. That event has been held across Johannesburg, Nairobi, Lagos, Accra. Last year we did Mozambique, and this year we're doing it here. And we're essentially partnering with Sahara Ventures. So tomorrow is the day of the event. We've selected 10 entrepreneurs who will be pitching. We invited investors from around the world and from around the continent. Past events we've resulted in about $23 million worth of investment. So for us, it's really about creating that environment for capital to meet the opportunities that these entrepreneurs are creating and building leverage and value over time.
So thank you very much for that very excellent description. So as we get to the round two now, let's get to the details. Let's get to understand what's really happening on the ground that prepares our people for the future of the digital revolution happening in Africa at the moment. I'll start with you, Hodan. What is you and women doing to support this kind of digital acceleration in Africa or in other places of the world, and what do you think is applicable in our context? And after that, we'll come to you, Engineer.
As I said earlier, that we have this innovation facility that is looking at issues of policy, looking at the whole infrastructure, the ecosystem, to ensure that it's conducive, it's not discriminating women further. And for us, when we analyze it, we under various researches that has been taken, we look at the barriers, for instance, that are preventing women from accessing and benefiting from the digital finance, if I could give that example. Issues of infrastructure is still a challenge in Africa, particularly for women, where we know that even on access to mobiles is less than 10% that do have access to that. The costs are very high for women to access, which increases their barriers, as well as I think, and that's something that we need to look at in the entire perspective on making sure that laws and policies do not have a hidden discriminatory factors that prevent marginalized groups, poor women, rural women, uneducated women to benefit from the digital revolution. And a particular thing might not be relevant here in Tanzania, but you see it elsewhere in Africa, is the demand for women to have multiple levels of identification, often requesting their husbands, their fathers, and others to, the male relatives in their families to allow them to access identification, for even access to mobiles and so forth. So those are barriers within Africa that we need to address, as well as, of course, the key thing I think for women is issues of education, of knowledge, of the IT skills, and this we go back to our education system, where we need to ensure that girls at a very, very early age have the resources, the knowledge, the encouragement from the schooling systems, the quality education, to ensure that they have access and are in the sciences, the maths, the technology, and the STEM industry, so that they will be able to then to access the future jobs and so forth. And the other things I think is definitely these social norms that are contributing to gender inequality, and it's even higher so in the technology field, where we see that there's few women because of the education, because of lack of the resources, connectivity and so forth, is preventing women from moving forward. So then we look at those analyses, then we sort of look at what are things that we can do collectively with government institutions, with private sector, with key development partners in unlocking the benefits of digital finance. And one of the key elements really for women in Africa is mobile money accounts. And that has sort of been the leveraging in terms of the equalizing of opportunities for women and girls, even though the number is low, but once women do have access to mobile, they quickly catch up. It's that opportunity, it's that mindset. And so we need to make sure that the technology, the companies that produce various apps and so forth are not putting in other discriminatory factors, that are looking at the needs of women and making women-friendly tools and so forth, and looking at it from a gender lens. The last thing I just want to emphasize, two last things, excuse me, is the interventions that could create and boost gender financing. Of course, the policies need to be enhanced by government. We need to make sure that the entrepreneurship, the private sector, is also taking into account inclusion and equity, as well as leadership and so forth. So we need to make sure that there's better awareness, there's collective efforts to address these barriers for women, and give incentives for young girls in schools, women in startup ventures and so forth. How can we make sure that they have the opportunity to move and expand on their entrepreneurship? And usually it's the financing that is the biggest barrier, as well as the workload at the social factors that prevent women and so forth. So there's a number of things that we look at, and a lot of it is analysis, but also coming up with innovative ways in partnerships with private sector organizations. We're, for example, supporting a program with MIT at the global level, looking at innovative ways. We're working with these initiatives of, in Canada, for example, bringing in innovation to solving problems, gender-specific problems in Africa and in Asia and Latin America. So seeing what are the best practices, how do we shake things up and ensure that women do benefit.
Yeah, that's perfect. I would come back to you with two questions. One, I would want to know which African country you think has made a very significant progress with respect to those kind of services, and if you have any example of a service that you would want to share. It doesn't have to be in Africa, it could be anywhere in the world, and how that sort of addresses that gap. With you, Eric, I'll come back to you with a question. I would want to know if you think the enabling environment with respect to finance and capital in the country works in your favor for you to do your job, and probably have more of you working in this space in the country. Back to you, engineer. Is there enough engagement? Are we, as techpreneurs, talking to the government enough in a way that the government can create an enabling environment for us? I think there's usually time and again, there's this bubble where we sit in our own spaces and innovate these new ideas and just expect that the government will come along and magically they would understand whatever coding and everything else that we do in our hidden areas. Are we bridging enough information so that the other side, on the side of government, understands what we are doing so that they can create that enabling environment for us?
I think you've asked me a very difficult question, and I'll explain why it's a very difficult question. I've worked in the government for the past 24 years, but I also have another life on the other side. I do coding in everything, I sit in standardization, etc. So I am a coder, but I'm also an insider. I can speak policy at the same time. I can be in both spaces at the same time. Now, coming back to your specific question, I don't think there is enough engagement between what is happening outside the government space and what's happening within the government space. But nonetheless, the government is already doing some work. Is there room for improvement? Yes, there is a room for improvement. I'll cite some few examples on what has been happening. I gave the first example back in 2005 when the converged licensing framework was put in place and its impact in the development of the ICT sector in the country. But I also want to give few other examples. One of them is that in 2009, the government decided to build the National ICT Backbone. The backbone was completed in 2013 at the capacity of about 10 gigabits per second, but immediately 2 years later, we figured, oh, no, this is not working. We upgraded it all the way to 200 gigabits per second. Now, that's the direct government investment into the ICT sector, make the environment available at the infrastructure level. We also updated our ICT policy in 2016. Is it sufficient? No. At the time we finished updating the ICT policy in 2016, there are new developments which came up. The things like 5G, blockchain, etc., are not included in that document. Is the government working towards seeing in these things? Yes, it is. How far do we have the engagement between the private sector-led initiatives and the government? I would not consider that to be sufficient. But like I said, there's only one room in any house which is never full, which is room for improvement. So I implore among the private sector actors and the government actors to actually improve on the terms in terms of engagements. The fund in its life of the past 10 years has worked a lot in trying to make sure that we put up as much infrastructure as possible in deep rural areas. To reach the 94.5%, it involved a lot of investment from the government side, also from the partners, which are private sector operators who actually worked with the government. And I usually share this example. One of the areas which it made me a bit sad when we were doing this infrastructure engagement in rural areas. We were solving a problem, which is connectivity. At the same time, we were introducing another problem, which is you introduce a form of income poverty. That is now somebody who did not have to have 1,000 shillings to buy airtime. Now he has to find 1,000 shillings to buy airtime. So immediately, my preoccupation was, how can we leverage the presence of this infrastructure? Fortunately, the likes of mobile money came in, and they added a lot of value on the infrastructure. But the mobile money development brings in a very good example of disruption. Every piece of technology at the infrastructure level which can be used to deploy mobile money was available as a standard and as part of the infrastructure all the way since 1995. It required somebody to think on how to use the control channel of a GSM to actually provide this type of service. Now, I'm just talking about 2G, which was standardized in 1995, doing whatever it's doing now. We now need to put our imagination on what 4G or 5G would do to our lives. And I usually, given an opportunity, I don't stop saying this, that is, 5th generation of mobile communication is the first technology which is going to change humans. Everything else, we humans were actually using it, but this one is going to change humanity and the way we live it. We had this conversation about disruption, but I think we cannot escape the disruption which is going to be brought about by the 5th generation of networks. I was happy to hear what you said about the engagement with women, and this is one of the preoccupations which the Universal Communication Service Access Fund has been engaged with. We started a project about 4 years ago which is called Girls in ICT, which is trying to, as much as possible, get as many girls to get involved with the coding of computer coding. We engaged at the public schools across the whole country. We picked and we were training on average about 250 girls across the whole country to make sure that first we remove the fear from them of using computers and doing computer coding. And it's something which we believe it could be a drop in the ocean, but it's a thinking in the right direction at the government level. We also were involved in the health sector, trying to see how best the ICT infrastructure can help the problems, or can solve the problems at the health sector. And it's one of the areas which we believe it can actually improve the social outcome in a country like Tanzania with all this infrastructure in ICT. How can we leverage communication technologies with health sector to make sure that we reach out as many people as possible? And only a month ago in Zanzibar, the Universal Communication Service Access Fund hosted a focus group on health and AI. Here, it's a global focus group which was in Zanzibar. One of the key takeouts was how can we use the new disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence with the infrastructure we have in the country to reach as many people in the health sector. And there are so many topic groups between the doctors and the data scientists who actually were talking about. And one area which actually fascinated us was now with the current development of AI in the radiology department, that is the AI engine which was trained was as good as a 7-year experienced radiologist, specialist radiologist. So we know in the next 1 or 2 years, this could be even better than a very experienced radiologist. As I think I've covered some of the points of something more for now. Thank you.
That's great. So I'll come back to you with a question on sort of forward-looking. As Tanzania, do we have the right policy, the right framework as we prepare our 50 million, 60 million, soon to be 100 million population before end of the century to be part of this digital revolution, to be part of the 4th industrial revolution? Or we just don't have enough framework and we should just brace ourselves for a disaster? So over to you, Eric. I've gone around the booth, fantastic ideas, fantastic entrepreneurs. I feel like we don't have enough money going around for all these ideas. Looking on the other side, I feel like Silicon Valley has more money than ideas, so everyone else is just going to the same ventures. Is there something we can tweak in Tanzania to attract more capital, more of you coming in? Are there barriers you're facing that should be addressed? And I just want to sort of focus on that area.
I mean, the easiest way is then take all Tanzanians to Silicon Valley and then bring the Silicon Valley. That's harder to do than I said. I think that there are a couple of things interventions and sort of what I call short-term, medium-term, and long-term approaches that needs to be in place. Like you said, I think there's enough proof points about innovation with the youth, right? I give you some statistics, and this is quite staggering. Today in Africa, the universities graduate about 11 million people. The workforce is only able to absorb 3 million.
3 million.
Now, if you look at Africa's population, it's about 1.2 billion. It's going to quadruple in the next 2 decades. 70% of that is below 25 years. Right. So if I'm a policymaker, what you need to think about is, how do I create an environment for jobs? My biggest headache is jobs as a policymaker. Right. And jobs are created by entrepreneurs, by businesses hire people primarily. So then you need to think, how do we create an environment for more and more businesses to thrive? And for businesses to thrive, they need to have investment, right? They need to have, be able to hire the right people. So how academic institutions churn out human capital is very important. On the investment side, there are a couple of things that make for more unleashing of local capital. So one of them is incentives. So as a government, how do you create some incentives for more and more local and foreign capital to be deployed in the areas that you think meet your development agenda? For us investors, one of the such frameworks is tax incentives, right? For example, if you go to a place like South Africa, the government gives you a tax rebate against early stage investment. A lot of people talk about South Africa, but the reason it works is that I can write off between 45% to 50% of my angel investment against my tax. So right there, it's a very strong incentive. In Israel, what the government did was said that anybody who does early stage investment, we will match whatever investment you make dollar for dollar. So if I put $1 into a company, the government is going to put another $1. Right? Singapore did something last year that was quite revolutionary. They said that if the company fails, the government will give you about 70% of the money back. So today, a lot of entrepreneurs are moving to Singapore to start companies because the government has created the right incentive framework for capital to move to Singapore, and therefore a lot of entrepreneurs will go to Singapore. Right? So as a government, you need to think strategically about how you create incentives that enable long-term growth, but in the short term, you have to sacrifice certain things. And some of the examples I gave. So that's very important. The second part is you also need to, from a policy perspective, create that environment for the entrepreneurs themselves. So I'll give you a few more examples. Like in Israel, for example, when you started a company for the first 3 years, the government gives you a tax rebate. Right? So as a young entrepreneur, you don't have to pay tax. So that's another incentive that the government can put in place, because if you do that, then more and more people will have the means to start companies. And this is outside the realm of the availability of capital. Right? I mean, other things that could be done from the academic part is government enabling academic institutions to interact more and work with private early stage companies to groom the skill set that they need. So the reason why only 3 million is absorbed into the workforce, part of that reason is that a lot of graduates come out and they are not job ready. You cannot hire them immediately. Right? We see this with a lot of our companies. They put job ads out there, you have a room full of people, and you interview them and you realize that probably only 3 people actually understand the job that they're applying for. Right? So there's a big mismatch between what the academic environment is producing and what industry needs. From a curriculum perspective, sorry about that. So you need to create those linkages. And then the last is from the side of R&D. If you take most countries, right, the government creates dedicated pools of capital. The US, the NSF, that funds a lot of research. And so if you want to do research, you get access to capital that helps you to work through that element of making the idea into a product. In most countries in Africa, those resources are not there. And this is another way that the government can have dedicated pools of capital so that entrepreneurs who have ideas can tap into those funds, do the R&D, and then once they get to a product, then it's easy for an investor to then look at it. Right. So those are some of the areas that the government can work with private sector in creating the right environment for innovation to thrive.
My final question in the final round to you would be on your experience on investing in Tanzanian companies. And I want a very candid feedback to techpreneurs about what about them that might not make them cut it in the competition that they face in the world. And the best place to get that feedback is from the money guy. So expect that coming over to you. So back to you, my colleague from UN Women, Hodan. I asked for two things. One, if there's any best case country that you're proud of in Africa or elsewhere in the world that you think has done very well in the digital space. And the second question was if there's any specific story or intervention that has impacted women based on tech that you'd want to tell us.
Well, the best country is Tanzania, I have to say. I'm serving Tanzania now, so, but that's, my prejudice. But, maybe I can turn that question around in terms of, best practices. Because, I mean, in several countries in Africa, there are several challenges that we're all facing in infrastructure and access are definitely ones. But I would like to give maybe two examples that is looking at interventions that have worked. And those are examples that a program that we have that is called Buy from Women. And it's an initiative that is implemented in Rwanda, Mali, and Haiti. And we're providing, it's a digital platform that will allow access for women farmers to information on prices, on inputs and financing, and helping them to, strengthen their skills and understanding and so forth to then improve productivity and income. And that has worked, and we wanted to see how that could be applied here in Tanzania. And we're having a discussion with a number of our partners. And it's usually, it's like a pilot project, and hopefully then the local communities then take it up and expand it, but through strong partnerships with entrepreneurs, private sector, the big technologies and so forth, and they apply GPS, land mapping and digital recording of land holdings, and through that program we also make sure that women have title deeds, and we make sure through cloud search, cloud savings and so forth, that women do not lose their title deeds and do not have challenges in showing in terms of for collateral and so forth. And it's also helping them with virtual financial accounts through mobile wallets and using different messaging and so forth. It doesn't require a very sophisticated mobile device. The other one that I'm really proud of is a very interesting initiative here in Tanzania that we are working with our partners, and it's an interesting program that's called Wanawake Sasa Champions Ungozi, Women Champions on Leadership. And it's an interesting partnership that we have with two civil society organizations as a way of, sharing information, advice on, and also, using various mobile app, a specialized app to ensure that we're promoting and sensitizing women in leadership, especially in local leadership. As we know, in Tanzania, the percentage of women in local government is very dismal. It's less than 5%. So we want to look at social norms, using technology and community mobilization as a way of changing perspectives and attitudes, and then document that in terms of information and analysis for future intervention. The other is a very interesting intervention in Kenya, This is through a program that is from the Trust Fund on Violence Against Women that UN Women manages. And we have a partnership with the Physicians for Human Rights. And they've developed a very interesting medical, it's called a Medicap. And the idea is to address the medical and legal processes to improve responses and accountability against sexual violence. So what happens is that the app is designed to assist doctors in documenting evidence of sexual violence, and then that information then is connected to the police, to medical and legal professions, and the other service providers. And it's documented in a very confidential manner and very a way that is protecting the survivors, and also gives the information then is used for prosecution and so forth. So it's in many of the cases, as we know, for sexual violence cases that come to court, is the lack of evidence. So this, how do we then link the physicians, who are in many cases the first contact that survivors have, to ensure that whatever evidence is needed for cases against sexual violence are done in this very sophisticated way. It's done in Kenya, and this is something that I think countries also in Latin America have taken up. And those are, many things, but for me, I think what I think for Tanzania, it's important. My pet peeve really is when I travel in the country, and we're talking about, innovation. We have brilliant people who are here. Sahara Ventures, yesterday I put out a call to say that we need to think different. We can't be calling about, the fourth revolution, where you have women and young girls who do not continue with their education. We're losing an incredible resource for the country. And basic things as water and sanitation are so critical for girls. Forget about the quality of education, the science and technologies. If you go to rural areas, in 2019, we see pit latrines, for God's sake. If there's any investment that has to be done, not just for government, the private sector, the innovators here, why would we pose that for young girls who are menstruating, who need water, to put them in such a condition in 2016? Yeah, 2019. It's really shameful. So we need to come up with innovative way to address those basic services and basic rights to modern technology, modern education facilities, so that girls and women, even women in the marketplaces, do not use a pit latrine. And really wanted to commend the efforts of the Gates Foundation in coming up with affordable latrines that are safe for women, comfortable for women, and that we don't, put African women and Tanzanian women as if they don't need a modern toilet and so forth. So we need to use the innovations that we're talking about to support real needs of our communities, of women and so forth. So infrastructure for the good, and technology for the good of our communities and so forth. So we really need to, yes, artificial technology, it's fantastic. We have to have that level of thinking and investments on research and design. I totally agree with you. But then we cannot then leave out the majority of the women and girls and boys and men who are in rural areas, who do not have light, who do not have education. So how can we think differently and really not just only rely and wait for government to support, but private sector, the brains in this room, in this conference for these past years, to come up with these solutions. And that's what, I'm hoping with, in next year with a partnership with Sahara Ventures, the World Bank. I commend you for the work that you're doing for the mobile courts. That is, reaching community, reaching a need that is there. And I would like, to put those challenge, and hopefully next year we can maybe put up a call to come up with solutions, innovative solutions to address the real issues that women and girls are facing.
Very passionate appeal, and I commend you for that. I think that requires a round of applause. Yeah, so we have to make sure that our tech advances, they address real human problems. Peter, I asked you, are we preparing enough for the next phase of our country, of our people, in terms of preparing our youth to take advantage of the critical mass? Then we'll finish with you, Eric.
A very pertinent question. There are several levels of preparation which I think any country should be looking looking towards, going towards fourth industrial revolution. The first level is the infrastructure, which I think the government of United Republic of Tanzania has done some work, and it's commendable that at least on the investment directly the government has done, and also through partners like private operators, we have in excess of 27,000 kilometers of fiber crisscrossing the country, which is commendable with the capacities which are increasing. The next level, which I think it's something we need to think about in more level of detail, is the policy, legal and regulatory framework. And I am of a school of thought of a form of regulation which is called ex post regulation. Instead of over-regulating something you do not know, you allow the industry to grow, and then you come to try to solve a problem. And this is something which has worked since 2005 with the converged licensing framework, by being service neutral and technology neutral in the licensing framework. It allowed new products to grow without actually saying you don't have a license for mobile money, because the licensing framework did not require you to have a specific license before you started service. The complexity introduced at this new type of economy, the intangible economy, is out of this world. But I'm not sure, given an opportunity to write down a regulatory framework, what will I write? I'm not really sure. So my mind is open. The third level of preparedness is around the question of education. I said this in my opening remarks, that the developments of technology now, this is the first level of development which is going to change us as human beings. Humans are going to be different in the next 15 to 20 years. The type of problems we grapple with would be solved by technology in a way we would never have imagined, to a point that I cannot even put down how will it be 3 decades from now. For example, I was giving an example, with the developments in technology, with what is already in place and in the standards for 5G now, there is a subtopic of discussion in the standardization which is called ultra-low latency. They've figured out that a delay of less than 1 millisecond to any human is real time. So they're developing products for ultra-low latency that will look real time to a human eye. Assuming that my glasses would have a camera which works on the ultra-low latency, I look at her, it Googles, gives me an answer of where I've met her, and provides it in my glasses in real time, in less than 1 millisecond. The whole question of me forgetting faces disappears. So that's the future. How are we prepared as human beings? What do we need to put in our school syllabus to ensure that humans would gracefully transform themselves to that level of development? And I've just given an example of what has been in our standards for the past 2 or 3 years. I was sharing with somebody a code which was written 3 years ago in 2016, which somebody can record my voice, reads the pattern in my voice, and transfer that voice to an AI engine, and this AI engine will be speaking in my voice. So instead of me picking up a call, I'll be sleeping, and somebody who is my AI assistant will be picking calls for me and talking to you without actually knowing if it's actually you're talking to Peter or you're talking to somebody else. And this is 3 years old. let's talk about what will be there 20 years old. At the level of education, somebody was talking about fears this morning, and I'm not sure if fears would actually even describe what is in front of us. So in my opportunity, let's suspend the thinking, let's suspend the way we think about our lives, the future, just let's embrace the future. We'll figure out, we'll solve some of the problems as they come.
Thank you very much, Engineer. So on the final note, back to you, Eric. One person tried to describe Tanzanian entrepreneurs, and I mean, just being a devil's advocate, said they lack the killer spirit. They lack that final vigor that pushes them to, to sort of get stuff done. And probably instead of seeing 20 Jumannes, we are seeing only one Jumanne doing what he's doing at the moment. Are you experiencing the same thing when you are trying to find businesses to invest in? And if not, prove me wrong.
Well, this whole entrepreneurship thing is sort of what we call first generation, right? So it's going to take time to replicate the Jumanes. It's going to take time, right? I don't think that should be the focus. The focus should be, if we found one Jumane in Tanzania, how can we work with him for him to be so successful that every other person begin to aspire to do that? That's the way to think about it, right? Because Silicon Valley was built over 50 years. And actually, the Draper family, Tim Draper once told me that his great-grandfather, when he came from the Second World War, the Stanford family gave him money and said, go look for companies to invest in. And they will go and knock doors, and if they see semiconductor in your name, it means you're a tech company, right? So it's a different criteria, right? But we have to start thinking about, we think about how we invest in Africa from a bottom-up, not a top-down approach. So I'll give you, first of all, I want to respond to the gender issues that you raised, and then I'll give 3 examples of portfolio companies that we've invested in to kind of make my point. So we believe that there's enough data that supports the fact that companies that have female co-founders or participation in senior management do better than those that don't, right? So we as a firm, one of our philosophies is how do we push gender? We call it gender forward, right? And then secondly, how do we back more female entrepreneurs that are really solving real problems? And I will start with the first example. So there's a lady in the audience called Mary Mwangi from Kenya. Tomorrow you will hear her speak. So Mary started an amazing company called Data Integrated in Kenya. And what she's done is that she's been able, together with a team of young entrepreneurs working with her, build a way to organize the matatu system in Kenya. So today in Kenya, they've managed to reduce theft in matatus because there are cameras that they put in the matatu that senses whatever goes on. It counts people, so the matatu owners are able to know in real time how many people were in that matatu, where they moved from. They can track the route of the matatu, right? So this is a practical solution to a real problem that can be replicated here in Tanzania, can be replicated in Nigeria, it can be replicated in Ghana and across the continent, right? So what Mary is doing is revolutionary, is groundbreaking. And we're excited that she's a female entrepreneur who's solving a problem that even men have not been able to solve. The second example of company I want to give you is a company called Farmerline. Farmerline is from Ghana. What Farmerline does is basically give farmers access to information service, access to market, and access to tools to trade with themselves. As you know, in Africa, most farmers are smallholder farmers. Now, the challenge with that is that it's hard to get scale. So what they do is that they work through the cooperatives. And they build a very simple technology using IVR, which means that most farmers in Africa are illiterate. So the interaction with the web is, English becomes a barrier. But now that technology allows them to speak in the local dialect. It transcribes into English, fetches the information they want, and transcribes it back to them. By doing that, over 3 years, the farmers that use their services doubled their net income. That company became profitable after 5 years. Right. Now, that company employs what we call a low-margin, high-volume business model. Right. So the markets that we see out there, they are markets that you can provide services to. If you change the business model, you change the way you look at these markets, and you can really deliver services that can take those people out of poverty, and you don't need to just give them a handout, right? So one of the things that we really believe as a firm is that you don't need to sacrifice returns in order to make impact. We believe that you can do good and do well at the same time if you back entrepreneurs that are solving real problems on the ground and applying innovative business models to that. The last company is a company in Kenya called FinAccess. So FinAccess figured out that because everybody tops out their phone and talks and sends mobile money, they use that record using blockchain to build a credit history. And now the SACCOs can then have that credit history. SACCOs are MFIs. And now they can lend to those. A woman who sells crates of egg, now she can get access to credit because she uses her mobile phone for most of her interaction. So now we take that activity, build a credit history, and now that person, we can say, is worthy of getting a $50 loan every day to buy more eggs and go sell and then come and repay, right? And so what FinAccess is doing is really financial inclusion, bringing people that we traditionally would not have seen them in the formal market into, from the informal to the formal market, right? And that company this year grossed hit their $1 million revenue this year, and on track to hit $2 million. And basically they go out there and they're working with the SACCOs and onboarding them into the system and building inventory tools for those businesses, for those women to run their businesses as well. So in a way, I'm trying to bridge the gap that the things that my colleague are saying, that there's challenges on the ground. They are practical entrepreneurs that are building solutions that are solving these problems and creating business models, and those are the kind of entrepreneurs that we are backing, and that's why we believe that the future is bright for Africa.
Fantastic. On that note, may we all stand up, please, except my panelists. May we all stand up, please. We need a stretch. We are winding up this one. So 5 key takeaways, I would say, from this discussion. One is that there is a need for more engagement. So for any of you working in the tech space, for companies, you need to come together and see how you can increase your engagement with the government. The second part is the importance of government investment to back a lot of the discoveries and innovation that most of you in here are doing. The third takeaway is the need for incentive. If we want to attract more capital coming into the country, there is a need for incentive. The fourth point is that there is a need to have more stakeholder interaction, not only with the academia, with the private sector, development partners, as well as NGOs. And the last bit, we need to make sure that everything that we innovate and we take to the market tries to answer a valid issue, a valid challenge that is facing people in the society. We have to do good and do well, by quoting Eric. So may we all please have a very huge round of applause to our panelists. And you can have a seat. That was your price to pay. We are done here. Thank you very much for all of you.